Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right. So I was expecting a little bit more students, and so I thought most of our of the people of my generation have dealt with the duck curve for the last decade or so, and so we know what it is. But I thought maybe the student, grew up with it, and so I thought, let's take a little walk on the memory lane, explain the whys, and by fully understand the whys of what we see every day in the buildings, maybe the students will understand what to focus their energy going forward. So I'm Antonio Corradini. I work for an alternative energy efficiency consulting company located here in San Diego with office in California and other states. We are in between the utility, which are usually our customers, and the buildings, which are other of our customers. We do engineering, technology analysis, programs, and software, and we work with, as I said, major investor-owned utilities, private sector, federal, local government. So the old utility grid was fairly simple and pretty efficient. There was a power plant, a transmission lines, some transformer along the way, distribution system all the way to the building. The interesting thing of this is that the energy efficiency model associated with that grid was that everything counted. A kilowatt hour of energy efficiency was a kilowatt hour of energy efficiency, in the sense that you had the base load power plant, like the one on the left, which is the nuclear Diablo Canyon generating station, or you had the peaker plant. And more or less, those were ramping down and up and down as they needed to maintain the stability of the grid. There was mostly no concept of time. The concept of time was only in the early afternoon, where there was a peak on air conditioning and those peaker plants were coming online. Then we got the arrival of distributed energy resources, or DER as we call them often. And little by little, a little bit of internal combustion engine with or without heat recovery, fuel cell powered by natural gas and then converting hydrogen, wind, and definitely solar. And solar, and more solar. And the lady before me showed us how much the future will expect the solar to become the most important part of the new added capacity. Well, guess what? Solar power plants produce when the solar shine, and that's the problem. So here we got the duck curve, where basically we see that this is California. We had a more or less constant consumption throughout the day until later in the afternoon, when we had the peak consumption for the air conditioner. And when we started to add the solar generation, which this is not in scale, it's just to show you when the solar happened, what we got was the more solar went to the market, the more we generated more with solar, but nothing happened up there. So all of a sudden, we have a situation, 13 megawatt hour, or basically the equivalent of 7 San Onofre generating station that needs to come online in a matter of few hours. That's the problem. So as we talk about plug load, the question is, how can the plug load answer to that topic? Answer to let's consume more when we have overgeneration, and let's consume less when we have more demand and less solar generation. We haven't learned how to make the sun shine at night yet. And so this is an energy efficiency program that we actually are running on behalf of Pacific Gas and Electric, and we are consulting Southern California on very similar. You will see what is the value in dollar for the energy saved on a megawatt hour basis throughout the day, throughout the 24 hours. And you see how we went to less than $50 for most of the night until the early afternoon, and then all of a sudden we spikes because we are not producing as much solar when everybody's going home, turning on their conditioning, and now more and more going home and plug in their car. So to the question that the gentleman in the back asked before, do we consider electric vehicle plug load of the building? Since I don't report to any government agency, I can call it whatever I want, and my answer is yes. I do believe that those load are part of the commercial building, are part of the residential building, they are contributing to the problem. So ironically, as we have been wanting to decarbonize the grid over the last 20 years, more solar, which is good. I'm a solar installer, by the way, so I'm not criticizing the solar in no way, but has created that problem. So now, how can we solve the problem? So we get to the point of the presentation. We need to be flexible, and there are a few things that we can do to do flexibility. So one of them is this very old school but still effective time clock that can effectively turn off equipment where they are not needed anymore. We have much more fancy management system, occupancy sensor, we'll go get there. One of the ladies touched upon that before. All the way to fancy concept like the transacting energy. So let's talk about programmable thermostat. And I noticed that after me there's a presentation on programmable on thermostat, so I'm going to do faster than I would otherwise. Programmable thermostats are great if they are programmed. I'm in the field once every day, and I've been for the last 15 years, so imagine how many buildings I've seen. And I would say that every other building does not have the thermostat program. It means Thanksgiving, it means Sunday, on Monday thinks it's Tuesday, and so on and so forth. So that's a great technology, very inexpensive, but needs to be run correctly. Correctly means also not having a 2-degree deadband, because it means that we're going to be in heating mode almost every day, even in the winter. Sorry, we're going to get in the heating mode also in the summer, and we're going to be cooling mode in the winter, because the building does behave like that. Then we have the smart thermostat that, in theory, are better, no deny about that, but also have this wonderful feeling that you can adjust them. And for many occupants of the building, which are not engineers like us, that are not energy people like us, they think that, oh, I'm cold, let me turn it up. I'm going to turn it up to 8 degrees, thinking that the building is going to go to 64 degrees on a Monday morning to 8 degrees in 5 minutes only because he or she put to 80. No, it doesn't go like that. Vice versa, in the summer, I say, oh, it's hot, it's 74, it's hot. I'm going to turn it down to 66. Not even knowing the air conditioning is not even designed to go down to 66. So all of a sudden, we gave them tool. Instead of doing more, instead of doing good, they do bad. So I'm a big fan of those thermostats that show you what it is and you cannot change it, or they have the little cage around so you cannot touch it. Only because the people that know should know how to touch them. And this is a technology that we have been studying for San Diego Gas and Electric a few years ago, and now for Southern California Edison. Occupancy-based thermostat, widely used for more than a decade in the hotel rooms and basically nowhere else. In the hotel room, it's fairly easy. You have a room, thermostat. You walk in, the AC goes on. In commercial building like this one, we have what we call the multi-zone air conditioners. Being air handler or package unit is less important. And what happens is that they might be fed information for few thermostats in order to please the worst thermostat in cooling or heating. The heating system, boiler or heat pump, or the cooling system, chiller or compressor, are always engaged. This is one of the two vendor that is trying, and I emphasize the verb trying, and I invite your student maybe to help them, in creating a network where those thermostats can talk to each other and realize that if all the zones are empty, the unit can go off. And especially nowadays, with more people that enjoy working from home or going to home early, at 4 o'clock, often buildings are empty. So guess what? While people are going home, starting their Friday afternoon party, plugging their cars, and exacerbating the duct curve, our building right now are keeping cool the furniture. Instead, this technology could exactly try to match the fact that people left, and therefore the building doesn't need to be cooled anymore. Ironically, we did install this technology in my office, and we started the monitoring and verification period during slightly before COVID. So I had the data from the non-retrofitted units and the retrofitted unit during COVID, where obviously those units were shutting off all day long, and the other one were going business unit until I went there and I turned it off with the breaker. But this is an interesting feature only because the match of occupancy and the need of the air conditioning meet the solar production. The lighting occupancy sensor, also very effective. They've been around for a while, so I won't talk about it. Demand control ventilation is another interesting feature, and the lady of the Industrial Assessment Center, by the way, I hired many of those engineers over the last few decades, sent them our way when they graduated. So HVAC systems do have a feature to reduce the amount of outside air that need to be heated or cooled when there is less occupancy. And most units don't have the CO2 sensors. So this vendor came out a couple of years ago with a very simple plug and play wireless sensor that you put in the duct for the unit, the plug in at the CO2 port, and this one goes on the wall. And all of a sudden, what happens? Again, when those people at 3:30 start to vacate the building, instead of cooling 95-degree outside air to the 55, we are realizing that there is less people inside. We can close the dampers, recirculate more 75-degree air, 75 compared to 95, 20-degree delta T is not a joke. So that's another simple technology that I wonder why it took so long to make it work. But I remember that 10 years ago, I was doing a study on how difficult it was to deal with CO2 sensors. So again, what we're trying to do is get to a match between production, solar production, and building consumption. And then we have the other load management, and ironically, in digging out this study, I realized that we did collaborate with CalPlug back in 2015. And those were, again, for other computer type power sensing unit that, again, when people go home, they turn off the power or they turn off the TV when they fall asleep in front of them. Again, fairly small load, but across hundreds and thousands of usage could become very interesting. Advanced control, this is a building a few miles up the road. Edison financed this study where the software became much more predictive in managing all the component of the HVAC, what I call the food chain, from the thermostat all the way to the cooling tower. And there were several interesting achievements as far as demand response, peak demand savings, load reduction across the board, and even quick load shed when Edison was sending what is called the ADR signal. And finally, we get to the elephant in the room. In my house, before my wife got the electric car, we were using 500 kilowatt hour a month. Now we use 1,000. In our headquarters, we had 30 people. We had one electric vehicle 6 years ago. Now we have 10. So imagine what happened when all those 10 coworkers are going to plug in the car on the infrastructure outside the building that right now we don't have. But when we will have, what's going to happen? So the question is, can you delay the charge? And arguably you can say, yes, if I am educated enough, I will not plug in my car when I get home at night. I will plug in before I go to bed, as I do with my wife's car. But what happens if you plug in your car and the grid needs your power, as we're talking about this bidirectional, and now you want to pick up your takeout and the car is empty, which is exactly why the auto manufacturers are very reluctant, to say the least, in allowing somebody else to mess with the charging and discharging profile. Because guess what? If you cannot drive your car to whenever you need to go, you won't blame Edison. You won't blame the duck curve. You're going to blame your car manufacturer. So it's an understandable problem, and therefore communication between the car, the battery, the building, the grid are becoming very important. Ironically, I was exposed last week to a new company that is taking a completely different approach from the industry. The industry is going to the fast charger, the fastest, DC, 75 kW, boom. They're going the opposite. They're going multifamily, don't have the electrical infrastructure to go fast charger. Instead, they're using the 15 amps plug. And I say, if somebody can go home at 6 o'clock and plug their car, the car is going to charging very slowly overnight, we're going to achieve a lot of good with very simple and low cost, and we're going to exacerbate less the duck curve because we're going to have a constant profile. So different approaches, different innovation, as you were talking, to tackle the same problem. Batteries, probably the most important solution. So this is a study that we did in collaboration with the California Energy Commission a few years ago, when we studied how building can charge and discharge based on the time of use prices, and a single that was from EPRI, and I saw that there is something from EPRI here. So interesting, time of use price is an interesting topics. The utility are by definition always a few years behind the market because they need to ask permission for the California Public Utility Commission. So if you are trying to maximize for the benefit of the grid, you are not maximizing for your cost. And usually people want to maximize for their cost. Now, luckily, the cycle of approval of rates is faster, and so there's a more a match between charging and discharging. We're going to get to battery in a second as we go to this. This is the smart home study. On the top, you see the typical uncontrolled load. You see some lighting, you see the pool pump, you see some EV, cooling, domestic hot water. The net loss is what? Is a disaster. You are exporting to the grid when the grid doesn't want it, and you are sucking for the grid when the grid is more congested. That is the typical advanced home with no control. If you control it, all of a sudden you create a much smoother ride that allowed the occupant to be as comfortable, to have the occupant and still enjoy their pool, still enjoy the electric vehicle, but we have a smoother ride. Exactly because we use the battery, we charge it at night, and we discharge it over the evening, and a few other things. So, another way to look at it, the uncontrolled building is going to have little to no consumption, and this is for a residential house, but multiply it by the square foot and you get the same for a building, commercial building. The uncontrolled building, little consumption, negative overgeneration, neck of the duck. The controlled building suffer a little bit of the overgeneration anyway, because we need to put the energy somewhere, but at least we don't have the duck problem, the neck of the duck problem. And why the neck of the duck problem is the most important one, for two reasons. One is because to produce the power we use gas turbine, which are much more polluting, and B, because we need to add more capacity, as the lady was saying before, and we don't have that capacity. We cannot add solar capacity, we cannot add wind capacity, so we only can add gas turbine capacity. They don't allow us to do hydro power plant anymore, so that's why it's important to control the building, because we will never be able to solve this one unless we use plug load, battery, and the likes. If now you put together many of those buildings receiving the same signal from the same node, all of a sudden you're achieving what we call in the industry a virtual power plants. And a colleague of mine, I've been doing a collaboration with San Diego Gas and Electric over the last few years in a remote, unserved, let's call them poor area, where basically they were at the end of the line. So every single time there was a power safety shut off because wind, they were cut off. Can you imagine? On top of being cut off on the power, when it's windy, you might have a fire and you cannot use your air conditioning. You cannot use your well pump, and they don't have the city water. Disaster. So all of a sudden, we have a local community there with everybody trying to reduce their load. There is a decent sized solar power plant at a community center. There is a battery at each house. They all communicate with each other, so even when SDG&E cuts off the power, they get by. Don't get me wrong. They don't crank the thermostat at 66. They're going to say, hey, we're going to automatically put you at 78 or 80, but hey, 78 to 80 is much better than 95 to 100. So this is another future of your plug load when you combine them. In conclusion, yes, we can. The concept works. Many technology are there. I believe the communication protocol is the biggest problem. Do you want to talk ADR 2.0? Do you want to talk Zigbee, Modbus, Ethernet? There is an alphabet of communication protocol, and everybody believes their protocol is the best, and they don't want to adapt to each other. There is actually a company down the street here that has created a device that has every single communication protocol. And so the beauty is that you put it on the wall, you attach what they got, and then through their server you can communicate with different devices. So I do believe we'll be able to get there. Eventually, the last frontier is going to be real-time pricing, where your house, your building receive an information and react to it. I have a hard time thinking about that, because I think it's a dangerous game. What Texas went a couple of winters ago was exactly that. Supply-demand mismatch. People didn't know, and didn't know that turn a light was costing $10 every 10 minutes. So I'm a little bit skeptical on that topic, but the bottom line is that we have the technology to help the grid avoiding the neck of the duck. I believe that's it, and if you have a question, I'm here.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was great. I'm wondering what you've seen as somebody who's kind of boots on the ground since the pandemic in terms of some of the maybe contrary measures that have been suggested around air quality, especially disabling demand control ventilation, and I guess in particular for commercial spaces, and where you have sort of this totally new set of, I guess, possibilities where maybe you're extremely worried about air quality and you want to ventilate properly for that, but then also you have much more vacancy than you're used to dealing with just in the last 2-3 years, and you have a lot more opportunity there to save energy. So have you seen a lot of change from sort of the status quo in that regard, and do you think it's here to stay in certain ways?
Good question. We actually have not seen building taking the ASHRAE guidelines on COVID and related airborne diseases seriously. I did wrote a paper about it a year ago, exactly on the fact that the ASHRAE were very taxing on the energy, but basically nobody really adopted them. Obviously, a few did. There were other methods, such as UV lights and the likes, to put in the ducts or in the rooms at the higher elevation, obviously, than people. But ultimately, I think that, unfortunately, COVID is in the rearview mirror, and I think we haven't not learned as many lessons as we could have had. And when the next one, hopefully not, but if the next one comes, for sure, the air conditioning systems are not ready to respond in a better way or get back. Right now, what we do see for measurement of CO2 and other pollutant in building is that because there's much less occupancy, the air is cleaner.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering if you could talk about the trade-offs between residential energy storage and EVs. In looking at your controlled versus uncontrolled chart, it looked like basically if you were to just shift your EV charging later in the night, you would end up with a very similar profile compared to what your controlled profile was, which I think was distributed storage, probably used to shift the timing of your EVs. Now you've got 2 steps of storage and discharge rather than just one. So just curious the trade-offs between those 2 options and what led to your recommendation.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. The problem is that people don't like to change their habits. As you can hear from my accent, I come from a place where we're a little bit rougher. And so, yeah, it's hot, you know. Your car is not charged, make your meal, and you go out tomorrow for lunch, for dinner. Less people want those trade-offs, and so the solution to give them have the cake and eat it too is to have the battery. I agree with you that we wouldn't need necessarily as many battery if we were smarter about pre-cool the house, especially residential. You can stretch a little bit longer. You can do a nice 70 degrees from 2 to 4 p.m. At 4 p.m. your house is 70. You basically can cruise along, and you charge your car at 9 p.m. And if you have charged some at work during the 10 to 3 p.m. hours, you should have enough juice to be able to go down the street and get your, you get a takeout or what have you. But this study was also early adopter. Early adopter tend to be a little bit upper class with lower tolerance to those compromises. But I agree with you that it can be done with much less batteries.
Towards the end, thank you, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Towards the end, you mentioned about the biggest issue being communication protocols and also the alphabet soup of the protocols that are out there. Yeah, we see a lot of them come out. So my question really is, what's your vision? Where do you think we should land? Do you think a multi-protocol converter like the one that you just mentioned is a solution, or should the industry settle on one or more protocols?
I would be much richer if I had that vision. But Uh, I think that the utility ADR 2.0b has achieved a lot of success in doing what it's supposed to be doing. They just don't have achieved a lot of penetration. So if those type of houses that have the battery, or those type of building that have the battery, can put certain non-critical load under those non-critical panel and have these ADR 2.0 turn them on, in my mind, I call it DR every day. You know, load management it's a DR event every day. You have more severe of the event, prolonged event, less severe event, but the bottom line that the duck is there from May to the end, to Thanksgiving sometimes. I've been on a roof in the Central Valley doing audit at the end of March when it was 100 degrees. You have the duck right there. So the duck has been so long in time that we need to tackle it, not only the 3-4 DR typical days. Last year that we had 12 in a row was an anomaly. Usually it's only a few days, which is the problem. We don't fear the worst consequences. Now the consequences are getting tougher. So if I had to bet, I would bet on that one. And basically, every device should have their own communication protocol between its device internally. But then when you communicate with outside, you should have one of the most used, and in the utility world, I think is the ADR.
Agree, okay. However, having said that, in some parts of the country, utilities seem to be kind of pivoting towards yet another protocol called CTA 2045, which is Consumer Technology Association's 2045 protocol. Any thoughts about that?
I'm fairly California focused when it comes to emerging technology, and usually what happens in California ends up happening elsewhere. So I'm putting my bet there, but in 5 years we can have a beer and you can tell me that I was wrong, and I will admit it, no problem.
Thank you.
This is Therese Peffer from UC Berkeley, and my research has spanned a number of different directions in the last couple of decades. What I'm going to talk about is two things that are dear to my heart. One is thermostats, as it was kind of kicked off with the last speaker, mostly from the social science point of view, and also a more recent project that I'm working on creating a microgrid. I'll talk about both of those. But I want to just say first thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm delighted to come down. I hope I can get a tour of the lab before I go. But really, really happy to be here. I think, like many of you, we're driven by the passion to rapidly reduce carbon emissions. And so I think I started years ago looking at demand response and different devices that can enable that. So how are we doing here?
It's not working,
Oh, okay, that works.
so the jet pointer? Yeah, it's not working.
That's okay. I'll just use my hands and wave. See if that works. Okay, so one of the things before I started my PhD work at Berkeley was I was volunteering for an organization called Rebuild Together. Has anyone heard of this group? It's a volunteer organization. You basically, one day of the year, you go into people's homes. I was on the energy team. And so we did things like, remember these? And this is almost laughable, right? You can tell how long ago this was. CFLs were placing, we had caulk guns, and we were sealing cracks. And we have these little insulation things behind the outlets so that the air infiltration doesn't get into your house from outside. And one of the things we installed was a programmable thermostat. And we only had 5 houses that we were going into, and I think we only successfully installed 1. And part of the reason, one of the houses, we installed the thermostat and we got a call back saying, please come and remove this. I can't figure out how to make it work, right? And the one case where we were successful, it was because, oh, my grandson lives with me, he can take care of it. And so this got me thinking as I started my dissertation work, you know, what is it with these devices that are they supposed to save energy? And that's what we all want to do, right? Save energy. But they're not, right? And so one of the things I started looking at is just thermostat design. So this is like the ugly years, right? That trough. And then I think Nest really blew the water out on a lot of this stuff, right? Having a colorful design, having something that looked like you wanted to deal with it, right? As opposed to something that was ugly. I've had actually someone say to me, I don't even want to touch that rectangular thing on the wall. It looks ugly. Why would I want to interact with it? And now we have these wonderful, colorful touch display, things that you can interact with that give you more features, right? Some of them are a smart speaker, right? I think Ecobee has a smart speaker now that can actually play music. It can display photos, so you're not having to see just a number all the time. It can display the outside temperature and weather and things like that. So a lot of things that can go on. A big part of what thermostats do is to provide thermal comfort, right? And so this is a fun graphic. This was a number of years ago, a researcher in Davis asked people, what is the lowest tolerable temperature you can withstand in your house? What's the highest tolerable temperature? And then what are the ideals? What's your low ideal and high ideal? So I want you to just think for yourself, what is it for you? So just kind of think about what your range is. And I'll show you the data from this. All over the place, right? You have some people's, you know, high ideal lower than other people's low ideal and things like this. I don't know whether this was, just a caveat, I don't know whether this was asked in the winter or the summer, because that would have made a difference, right, I think. But it gives you a sense of thermal comfort is a range of temperatures. And when we've had, for years, we've had a thermostat that had a single digital number on there, that gives us the sense that that's comfort, is a number, as opposed to a range. So I think a lot about these kind of things. One of the things, projects that I was working on about 10 years ago was in usability. And so this is actually one of the reasons why Energy Star Sunset, the Energy Star program for thermostats, was because of usability back in 2009. Right, and so we started studying this. This is Jacob Nielsen's model for system acceptability. If you want people to accept a device, whether it's a home energy management system or thermostat or what have you, this is something to take under consideration. So one, is it social acceptable? Do other people have one? Am I going to look weird for having this kind of thing? Practical acceptability. I don't know how to get rid of that thing. Let's see. Anyway. Practical acceptability, you know, what's the cost? Does it fit into my house and to my lifestyle? Does it work with my decor? That sort of thing. Is it reliable? Can I rely on it to work for me? And then you have usefulness, which I think we understand. Utility in this sense is about what does it do for you, right? And I often think, I like his idea here that usefulness is a balance between utility and usability, right? My mom, when she was first using her cell phone, it had a horrible user interface. She couldn't figure out how to use it. It was not usable. But the utility of it, to be able to call people when she was away, that overrode any barrier that the usability had. And so she learned to figure it out. She decided to take the time to learn how to use it. Thank you. That's okay. Good segue. Okay, so let me, this is a very complicated slide, but let me break it down. So this was a number of years ago, we ran these usability tests. We had 5 different thermostats, 31 subjects, 7 tasks, and you can see the tasks there are listed on the bottom. Set the thermostat to heat mode. Turn it on. You know, it's the first cold day of the year, and you turn on your thermostat. All the way to more and more complicated type of tasks. And you can see, you know, that's just a very simple thermostat up there on the upper right. So, and I'll walk you through this. This is kind of complicated. So the 5 thermostats are on the bottom. a web-based one, a touch thermostat, a smart thermostat, a button thermostat. The only way you can interact with it was through buttons, push buttons, and a hybrid which had both a touch screen and buttons. Okay, and so this was the first task. Walk up to your thermostat and turn it on, okay? So the y-axis is time. It's a logarithmic scale. So you can see on the left there, the web thermostat did very well. The plus is if someone completed it, how long it took them to complete the task. Okay, so the web thermostat did really great. And then the red 0 is they did not complete the task. They were not successful, and that's when they gave up, right? So you see on the web thermostat that most people did it within 30 seconds or so. Great, 100% success. You look at the top. The hybrid one over here, all the way at the bottom, you had someone giving up after 10 minutes. Boy, and they weren't paid or anything. There's some perseverance there. But this was a thermostat that, this was the first task. Turn it on. And 46% of people were successful. Right? So these are the kinds of things that we were very interested in studying and looking at how we could figure out how to make thermostats more usable. If you can figure out why they're failing, then you can start looking into how do we make them better and how do we make them more useful so that people can save energy and so that we can reduce carbon emissions. So a more recent exercise I worked on was on commercial thermostats. So one of the things we did was we looked at what went wrong, and we tried to see by looking at the thermostat, were there ways, what were the attributes or parameters of each thermostat that contributed to usability or contributed to poor usability, right? And so we developed these, what we call heuristics. So for example, visibility of available options. If you can't even see what the options are on that home screen, then how are you gonna know what to do, right? Or another one that I like is a wide and shallow decision tree. If you imagine a decision tree that every point you have is a branch, right? And so if you have 3 options, that's 3 branches, right? And then the next level, you might have 3 more options or something like that. And if you have a very deep tree, every point that you have where it branches, that you have to make a decision, that's an opportunity to get lost. Right? You can imagine if you have, on your computer, you have a file folder structure, and sometimes you have folder structures that are very, very deep. And at any given time, you might not know where you are and how to get back out. So that's that same concept. So wide and shallow, giving people multiple decisions right at the forefront, right at each level, as opposed to having them go deep each time. And so we came up with these heuristics, and then we compared it to the interfaces of these different thermostats. This was for a small commercial endeavor, so it was not necessarily residential. So we were looking at things like, can you group the schedules, and how do these operate during with small commercial? And for each one, we gave it kind of a grade. Like the dark green did really well, was pretty usable. That heuristic was supported by that thermostat. And the orange is that heuristic was not supported by that thermostat. I'm going to predict that thermostat's going to have some usability issues. And so we did this across all of the thermostats. And it kind of gives you a picture of which thermostats I would predict, again, would be more usable or less usable. So I'm going to finish up this section. I do believe that thermostats are still helpful and useful. I really appreciate the fact that they are getting more user-friendly. I hate that term, but in terms of being colorful and touchscreen and things like that, and providing more functions that I think people want. Know that thermal comfort varies. I think usability is very important, and we have ways of evaluating them, and I think we need to continue to use these. I think when you can involve people in the design, in the control decisions, you're going to have more satisfied people, and the more engaged they are going to be. I would say one size does not fit all. You're going to have some thermostats that people really love and some that don't. And I put calibrate your sensors on there, and I didn't include the slide. When we ran this study with all of these thermostats, one of the things we did is we put them in the lab. This is the Center for the Built Environment up at UC Berkeley. And we found that some of the thermostats were off by 4 degrees Fahrenheit. So you want to talk about trying to control a temperature. Well, if you're not even reading the correct temperature, you're going to be way off. Some of the some of the thermostats we were able to calibrate. One of them we could not. There was no means of calibrating it. So even though it was 2 degrees off, it was 2 degrees off. That was all we could do. So from there, I'm going to segue to this other project that it's been running for a number of years. This is funded primarily by the California Energy Commission, and it is part of their Advanced Energy Community program. So the idea was, how do you get solar systems, how do you get energy efficiency, electrification into underserved communities, into, how do we really reach out to people? And so the first phase, it was like a paper study looking at the technical, economic, legal, regulatory, and social feasibility of doing this. And then the second phase, since October 2019, we've been trying to build it. And so I'll be talking about this project. The goal was to take a whole block and do a retrofit in older urban stock, right? And we have not yet found a precedent for anyone trying to build a microgrid or trying to do this in existing single-family, primarily residential. So you see a lot of projects with new construction, and you see it with multifamily, but not in single-family. And it's in California, what is it? 72% of housing is 1 to 4 units. So this is I think it has a lot of room to scale. And one of the things we wanted to do is to really put the ownership in the hands of the people. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So the main features here are do this energy efficiency and electrification retrofits on the older urban housing stock in a block, rooftop solar and a central battery to create a microgrid, stormwater mitigation and water efficiency. This block happens to dead end on a creek, so it worked out pretty well for us. Curbside EV charger and EV car share right there on the block. And then the innovative legal and financial structures for the community to own, manage, and maintain this. And we don't want to just do one. We want to try to create the template to do more, to scale this to other blocks. And I think the idea is that you could retrofit one house at a time, and this is what happens now. So here, if you take a slice of the city, it's 180 projects. Or if you were to do it in an eco-block manner where you're able to do a number of houses at once, it'd only be 9 projects. So we think that eco-block can reduce the time and effort and materials for retrofitting urban neighborhoods. And this is one of the things that we're exploring to see how we leverage economies of scale in this. And so these are a number of things that we're studying, and some that I think we already have some idea about in terms of solution. But one, obviously, you can reduce the capacity for solar and storage if you share it, right? Your roof might have a lot of shade, and mine has more, or mine's just easier to get to because I have a 1-story house and you have a 3-story house, things like that. So reduce capacity, especially for storage when you can share that. Reduced energy transmission losses, right? You're right there on site. Save construction time. My contractor said there's this concept of the half-day problem, and I never knew about this, but the idea that if your guys are out on a site and they finish at 1 o'clock, the next project is 30 miles away. Are you going to send them to the new project? Probably not. Probably going to send them home, right? And so he said it's really going to solve that half-day problem for labor that you see in a lot of construction projects. Fewer truck rolls, potential for bulk purchasing. There's a number of different things that I think can be involved here. Obviously, if you're car sharing, then there's less embodied carbon in your in vehicles. And decommission natural gas lines. Actually, our local CCA, East Bay Community Energy, reached out to us and said, we want to apply this eco-block concept of approaching a bunch of neighbors at once to decommissioning natural gas lines, right? Like, because you can't just get 3 people on a block. You got to get everybody to electrify in order to decommission that line. And that's really important for anytime there's an earthquake, there's fires, explosions, and so forth, just leaks themselves. So we thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then this other idea about rapidly increasing adopters through this neighbor or peer effect. So maybe you've heard this, that solar adoption is contagious. Sun City did a study on this a number of years ago where they went back over a 10-year period and they just looked at where solar was being installed. And you look over time, it starts off with one neighbor and you go back 3 years later, now there's 3 neighbors right around that. And solar grows in clusters regardless of income. I thought that was a really interesting finding. That wouldn't have been I wouldn't have thought that. And I do think that these new technologies, whether it's solar, heat pumps, induction stoves, they're hard to understand. So if you can talk to a neighbor about it, how did you install it? Who did you use? How much did it cost? What is the maintenance like? Has it lasted long? What brand did you choose? You can ask all of those questions of someone whom you trust, right? So we think that this is a key part of rapid adoption of some of these technologies. And we've seen it happen on the block. I've seen people, we've had, I think, 8 different meetings on the block, and we try to explain things. And I've had one of the neighbors stop me and said, hold on, Therese, someone had a question, and I tried to explain it, and no, Therese, let me handle this. So, and they explained it much better than I could, because they know their neighbor. They know where they're coming from. They understand what it might take to explain a certain concept to someone. So we think that this is a really important, and maybe our strongest finding to date is this idea of a peer-to-peer or neighbor effect in terms of economies of scale. We think it could reduce the soft costs of acquiring customers as well. If you can imagine, if your solar contractor was knocking on doors as opposed to gathering the block at one time and explaining home performance or solar or what have you. So I think a lot of value there. So a microgrid, we're talking about an islandable distribution circuit. So we basically have a connection to the utility most of the time, but when there's a power outage, being able to flip the switch and have this be an islanded circuit, so with both storage and a battery. So here's the layout of the block. One of the reasons we chose this block is that it had a capacity constrained substation, so it was 4 kV as opposed to 12 kV, and single phase as opposed to a 3-phase. And so this is the layout. We're going to have to add a transformer. You can see the battery pack there on the top of the slide there, the 125 kilowatt battery energy storage system, and a couple of individual BESS. This is our design. As you can imagine, through COVID and inflation, it kind of hurt our budget, so we're looking for more funding to complete this part of the project. So this is what it looks like in normal periods. The battery would discharge and charge based on the wholesale market. That's a wholesale distribution tariff. There's the EV charger that's on the system. And the association, we've actually created a homeowners association of the homeowners on the block, about 14 of them, to co-own 100 kilowatts of solar, the central battery and all of that, the EV charger. And then when the power goes off on the grid, flip is switched, and now we have a microgrid. Not all the houses need to join. There were a number of houses that chose not to join, and that's fine. What happens there is that the utility will flip a switch and their power will be out, just like the rest of the neighborhood. No problem. They don't want to pay for the operation and maintenance of this microgrid. That's fine. There's no problem with that. We're doing a number of things inside the home. As I mentioned, mostly we're not getting all the way into windows and stuff, but we are insulating and providing ventilation, replacing all the natural gas, the heating, cooking, water heating appliances, and so forth. And then, so this is related to our talk today. I am very interested in the home energy management side of things, of course, obviously from the usability point of view, but just from a functional point of view as well. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how are we going to manage the loads inside the building. And we looked at a number of different products, and we ended up thinking that the smart circuit breakers, the Savant system, would be the best one, partly because they work in an existing load center, and that was important. We didn't have to buy a new load center. The cost was appropriate, and they have a lot of interfaces with existing companies like SolarEdge inverters or different thermostat manufacturers, water heaters, and so forth. So this is a key part of what we're trying to develop in terms of being able to manage the loads so that we can have, during a curtailment or an islanded event, but also during normal operation, we're working with an aggregator to see if we can start, once we have 25 households, so 30 kilowatts or so, we think, that's a pretty substantial load to try to get some revenue from. So we're looking into that. And so this is what that looks like. We're working with this company called Hala. They're the microgrid controller, and they're the ones that have the partnership with the aggregator. So that we have a device at each home that they're able to control the loads in the house, look at what the solar is producing, the state of charge of the battery, and so forth. And other aspects of the project, I mentioned the curbside EV charger. When we surveyed people, I think it was like 62% of people said they would get rid of a second car if there was a EV car share on their block. So I thought that was a good finding. One of the fun things we got to do was a laundry to landscape workshop. This is taking your washer water, and there's a valve. You add a valve so that you divert it to your backyard, basically. And so we had 11 neighbors come out to one family's backyard, and we did the plumbing, and we dug these trenches and filled it in with mulch. It took about 4 hours. And it was a real great community builder. It's one of those things that I wish we had done that at the very beginning of the project. But it was a nice way of creating community. We do have a bioswale planned for that end of the block, mitigation for stormwater to slow and clean the water before it hits the creek. We'll do some rainwater collection, and then just a lot of the sidewalk. We'll remove some of the concrete in the sidewalk plantings and add some more tree plantings there. So it takes a village. We have, I think, 3 flavors of lawyers, and we have contractors and engineers and consultants on financial side of things. Work closely with the City of Oakland, working with contractors. Quite a few people on this project. This is probably the most important group, is the folks on the block themselves. A very, very diverse group of people, from age to income to education, language. I think there's 5 or 6 different languages spoken on the block. So we're very lucky to have them. And here's it just shows all the different folks that are involved in terms of the utilities and the CEC and the many, many, many consultants and folks that we work with. So in terms of takeaways, we want to provide energy retrofits to make the houses more comfortable. That's what the people want, right? They don't want those drafts. They want to be comfortable in their homes. We're letting them own the source of clean energy and providing a source of resilience, keeping the lights on during the next power outage. I think we'll improve both local and indoor air quality with the EV car share, and then providing that EV car share and local EV charging, reducing water costs and reducing stormwater runoff. So with that, I will take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I'm curious about the process of getting buy-in from the community, because one thing that CalPlug has been working on is taking a look at a potential project where we would be retrofitting a group of homes. But one of the things that we are continuing to run into some roadblocks is how do you get the community on board? How do you deal with the more administrative and legal side of things, getting buy-in from like city councils and things like that?
Yeah, I think anytime you have a pilot project, a new project, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
What we had a block for the first phase of the project that fell through because there was infighting among the block. And so the first thing we did in the second phase of the project is that we put out an opportunity notice, and we asked for blocks to come to us. And they were getting free stuff, but there was a bunch of stuff that they had to do. And that's been fantastic, because in a sense, they were on board from the beginning. They volunteered, and they talked to each other. So they came forward with about 10 households. And then when we looked at the balance of costs and things like that, we asked them to get more, and they ended up getting 25. We had 34 at one time, and some dropped out. But I think that's really key, is just engaging with people from the very beginning. And I've learned a lot. I'm an academic. I'm used to standing in front of people and talking. And I did that for the first meeting, and one of the homeowners came up to me and said, you know, you're going to get more buy-in if you let us talk. Like, oh yeah, that's right. And so then our next 7 meetings, we would split up into groups and we would listen. And that was much more effective, as you can imagine. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, that was great. I'm wondering about your microgrid project. I guess 2 things, but they're somewhat related. I'm also very interested in this issue of panel upgrades and how to avoid them, and if possible. And you hear a lot about smart panels, but I think relatively less for some reason about smart breakers. And it seems like in many cases, to my mind, you can just get away with controlling a couple of loads, and you don't really need that functionality on every single circuit, which I think is what you ultimately decided for your project there. So I guess my question is, you know, is it easy to select which circuits those are, and kind of like, I don't know, is it better sometimes to just throw the whole panel at it instead of trying to pick and choose where to try to have that control functionality? And relatedly, did you run into issues with code compliance in your microgrid project?
Yes. Yeah, really good question. And I think we're still struggling with this. There's a lot of reasons to replace a load center, a panel, right? And there's a lot of reasons not to, right? There's a cost associated with it. There's a cost to not only replacing the panel, but upgrading the service, right? And so we were balancing all of that, the cost of upgrading the panel, the cost of upgrading the service, and also being a pilot project where we can't really screw up, right? You know, when you have a lot of visibility. And so it was a balance of a lot of things. We were looking at the span panel. You probably heard about that. We were looking at Lumen has a smart panel. There's a number of manufacturers that have smart panels. And there was, you know, does it work outside? Oh, that model doesn't work outside. You have to create an enclosure for it. Well, if we're going to have an enclosure for it, then, you know, why are we doing this? My contractor says that a lot of his projects, he doesn't ask for a service upgrade, and he just he relies on some sort of switching or something like that. So I think that's a good option. I think there isn't a one size fits all. There's one house on the block that has it has knob and tube. It has fuses. We're going to replace that panel box, right? We're going to replace that load center. There's cases where you need to, because of if you're adding solar, then you need a place to be able to attach the bus bar to, or whatever it is. So I think the nice thing about the circuit breakers is that, yes, you can just choose the major loads. And again, that was kind of a cost consideration. If you can spend a couple $100 controlling as opposed to a few $1,000s, that was a concern. Yeah, but we're not doing a lot of plug loads here, as you see, but it definitely we could expand it. I think that's the nice thing about the smart circuit breakers, is that you want to add more things you want to control, you can just go and add them. It's not a big deal. Yeah, good question.
So I'm not sure if you caught this. 2 weeks ago, KPIX did a special on a family in Sunnyvale, and they wanted to electrify the house. First of all, they wanted to upgrade the water pump, or the water heater, from gas to electric. Okay, fine. They paid for it, right? The other part was they needed to upgrade the circuit breaker. The circuit breaker was on the right side of the house next to the driveway. So PG&E had to require them to locate that circuit breaker on the left side. And that cost $10,000. So the barrier here is PG&E. It's not technology. So how do you respond to that?
We loaded question, right? Is anyone from PG&E in the room? No. PG&E has been a partner with us, but we recognize that there are a lot of challenges there, right? Some of our project partners, the energy team of the EcoBlock project has met with PG&E. I think they met bi-weekly for 18 months. And they had meetings where they would have 4 different entities from the utility that had never worked together before. And then you come 2 weeks later and they're different people who don't know what's going on, and they're pointing fingers at each other. Well, that's your problem. Well, you're tariff. Well, you're engineering. Well, you're, customer service, whatever. They're all doing this. We hired a utility consultant to someone who used to work for the utility. And I didn't even know that this was a thing, but it is a thing. And they're able to navigate through a lot of that. Because if you know the hierarchy from within, then you can get those people together and you can get them talking. I think what you bring up is a really interesting point that I think, I do think that there are a lot of workarounds, but but sometimes you have to do just that. You've got to, trench the line from one side of the house to the other, and it's expensive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So our community is older here in Orange County, and there's a big debate about undergrounding power poles. We still have above ground poles, and so the city's wrestling with whether or not to pay for it itself, or whether it asks the state to help pay for it and how to do that. And so I know that there's a lot of communities, and certainly throughout the state, that have above ground poles, and they have concerns about wildfires and reliability of service. So where does that play into your selection criteria, and maybe collaborating with the utility or with the municipality in doing so? Thank you.
Right. The original design of the eco block was to have a DC backbone, and to create our own DC backbone that would be under the sidewalk, and we would just do a trench and connect the houses that way. PG&E did not like that. They wanted us to use their overhead lines. And it's been interesting because I hear it from both sides. I hear that we're researchers, right? We're asking people, well, what is the right thing to do? What is more reliable, underground or above ground? And we heard from both sides. Oh gosh, the wind blows and the power pole, and other people are like, well, anytime a contractor goes out there to dig, it just nicks a wire, and then the whole block is gone. So or there's cracks, and then there's water gets through. So I don't think that we answered that question. I think it's a good one. We did feel that the overhead lines were more scalable, and in this case, PG&E was they needed to upgrade the capacity of that line anyway down the road. So it made sense to work with them. And it does seem to me that there's an opportunity there, that if you can go to the end of the lines, of the gas lines, and you can go to those capacity constrained parts of the grid and start there with your eco blocks or what have you, I think that's what makes sense. But to answer your question about above ground or below ground, I don't think that we answered that well.
I think you'll find community support for undergrounding the pole, regardless of what the utility says. The local politicians and the community will recognize the benefit of mitigating wildfires. Wildlife urban interface, where these little cul-de-sacs or neighborhoods are on the edge of wilderness, and so that would be something to consider in your selection criteria.
I think you're right. I think a key part of that is who pays then. Who pays to underground that? Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Sorry, good presentation, but returning to the beginning of it when you were talking about thermostats and the user interaction. So I was kind of curious if you really found that you could actually convert people, because I mean, just looking in my own house, I've tried various smart thermostats over the years, but they never really passed my spouse's usability test, right? And she wants to be the thermostat. She turns it on and off, cycles it on and off. So did you see anything that kind of led to that people really did want to start using them instead of doing that, or you're just kind of hoping that people age out and the next generation is the one that does that?
I think that's a good question. So I feel there's 2 issues there. One, I've been studying thermostats for 20 years, and I haven't found one that I like. So I'm with your wife. Sorry. But the other part of that is I think that there are different kinds of users, and I think you need to recognize that. I think there are people that are the fiddlers They like to turn it on and off. They like to, and so you need to find a thermostat that enables that. There are people that want to set it and forget it. There are people that want to set a schedule and that's it. And it might be that's the same person, but it's just different times a year. You do one thing in the middle of winter, it's on a schedule. I'm not going to fiddle with that thing. It's going to be cold tomorrow, it was cold today, right? Or same thing with the middle of summer. So to me, it's more of a recognition that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and that I think everyone needs to find something that works for them. And I don't know, I think that thermostats are better now than they were 20 years ago when it was that plastic rectangular box. I think those are horrible. I think they're much better now in terms of usability, but they're still not great, I don't think. There's a lot of room for improvement.
Thank you, Therese. Good presentation. Again, going back to the thermostats, in office buildings, in many of, including our own office buildings, there is one which is usually heated or cooled by hydronic loops. Okay, there is one thermostat in every X number of offices. Okay, not every office has a thermostat, and many of these thermostats are dumb. Okay. What's your opinion on kind of satisfying the entire office crowd and at the same time saving energy for office buildings, which I think many offices I've seen have got very similar thermostats. That one thermostat serving maybe 5, 6, 10 offices or something like that.
So from a thermal comfort point of view, or from
Correct.
Control?
Well, from thermal
Heater.
comfort, energy savings. I mean,
Right.
you keep hearing, about staff bringing, little heaters to, warm themselves up during summers and things like that. Okay, I mean, we've seen that in newspapers. So how do we solve that problem issue that there is, ubiquitous in the country?
I think the Center for the Built Environment, they have their personal comfort systems, and I think those are the most successful. So, beyond thermostats, just bring comfort to the people in a low carbon way, right? So they have these chairs that people adore that both heat and cool you, right? I think that those are brilliant. When we were doing a study, we had an office where there was one person who was always cold and one person that was always hot. We gave them both chairs, they were comfortable. And I think you're going to find that all over the place. You're always going to have people that are nearby and they're fighting over the control of the thermostat. And you have to find the low carbon, low energy heaters and fans and things like that to make them comfortable. It'd be nice to say, oh, it's a control solution and you can use some sort of weighting system to try to figure out what's the ideal comfortable temperature. But I think it's just easier to make each person comfortable and let them have the control.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. There we go. All right, so we'll talk maybe about something a little bit different for a bit here. We've talked about electrification as a vector for decarbonizing, but there's others, right? And Chelsea talked about this a little bit with the one student project. Low carbon fuels, zero carbon fuels. How about that, right? So that's what I'm going to be talking a little bit today about. So I just want to acknowledge some of the supporters of the program here. I'm Vince McDonald, so I'm the director of the UCI Combustion Lab, just a couple buildings away. And so we've been studying how adding hydrogen to various end-use devices affects their performance. What about hydrogen? Is this a valid decarbonization vector? There's a few eras of hydrogen, I would say. Maybe the first is from Jules Verne, The Mysterious Island. What will they burn instead of coal? Water. Right? And of course, what he really means is water that's been decomposed into hydrogen and oxygen. Is that possible today? Of course it is. Right? So the thinking here back in 1874 is we can displace coal, fossil fuels with water, basically hydrogen. I'm showing this in the context of an Ingram viewer, which basically these terms, this is showing how many publications, papers, articles, anything has those terms in it. Right? And you can see there's really nothing happening here on any of these, lithium batteries, methanol, hydrogen, until 1960s or so. In the 1970s, the concept here of using hydrogen as an energy carrier was promoted, arguing that it's much cheaper to push hydrogen through pipes than it is to lay transmission lines for electricity. So there's one renaissance. 2005, another kind of peak, maybe due to this in part, right? The idea of using hydrogen to replace gasoline. A lot of these ideas are not new, right? But we're seeing them again. The question is, yeah, will it stick this time? Let's see. So some background, some of this you're probably quite familiar with. California has some aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals. How do we do that? How do we reduce greenhouse gases? Well, you know, one way is electrification. Another way is to try to decarbonize the fuels that we're using. So these two plots here show how natural gas is consumed, in this case in residences. All right, so this is from 2009, saturation study, 354 therms per home. The majority of it is in water heating, space heating, a little bit in cooking. Right? If we flash forward 10 years, there's even more gas being used, and water heating again is by far the largest consumer, followed by space heating. We can expand that out to the US. Again, space heating is used quite a bit. You can see office buildings consume quite a bit of electricity, quite a bit of gas, right? So point is there's opportunities here on the fuel side to maybe do something. If we look at commercial buildings in the state of California, you know, some 53,000 boilers, 750,000 gas furnaces, untold numbers of cooking appliances. What can we do? What can we do to try to decarbonize this from the fuel side? Right? So the first thing that's being looked at is the idea of blending, right? Putting in some hydrogen into natural gas to decarbonize that natural gas. There's advantages, right? We can use the existing infrastructure. So that would seem to be a relatively low-cost option. But the question is, what about end-use device behavior? Are these things going to explode? Are they going to make more pollution? What is the limit? We've already had that question today, right? How much hydrogen can we put in before things start to go wonky? I think it's important to point out, right, that this idea of a transition from one gaseous fuel to another has already been done at least once, right? Here's an example from the 1960s where the UK transitioned from town gas, which is a mixture of hydrogen and CO, synthetic gas. They transitioned from town gas to natural gas. It took about 10 years, but they did it. So, to the point of this talk, what happens to these kinds of devices when we add hydrogen to natural gas? These are things that if any of you have gas service in your home, you probably recognize. Cooktop burners, oven burners, broiler burners, water heaters, right? All these things can use natural gas. And by bringing in hydrogen to decarbonize some of that, that's a potential opportunity. So just a little bit on some relevant thermodynamics. These appliances are basically driven by what's known as the Wabi index, an Italian engineer. The way to think about this, it's how much energy can I push through a hole with a fixed pressure drop, right? If that amount changes dramatically, it sort of means there's a lot of complications involved in the controls, the way that these appliances operate. This plot here it's a little bit busy, but if we just look at this point here, this is natural gas. It has a Wabi index of about 48 to 50,000. If we track how the Wabi index changes with the amount of natural gas or amount of hydrogen added, right, we can see it goes down to maybe 42 and then back up. The thing is, it doesn't change a huge amount, which is really good, because that means the current control devices for these appliances may not need to have too much modification. The other thing from a combustion viewpoint is that hydrogen requires 24% less air to react compared to natural gas. Turns out that can be a very good thing when it comes to things like air pollutants, and we'll talk more about that. Okay, so we had a study that was done under support from California Energy Commission and others, right, where we basically measured all sorts of performance factors for all of these different appliances. The thing we were quite focused on was the operability, performance of the devices, but also the pollutant emissions. So let's just walk through a couple of these just to give you a feel, right? So here's the storage water heater. Here's a couple of examples of these devices. If you have a gas water heater at home, it's going to look something like this. And so we measured the emissions behavior from all sorts of these devices. And in fact, I'll just jump to a summary of it. We have data and results from 39 of these different water heaters, right? And the message is that as we increase hydrogen, the NOx decreases, the NOx goes down. And that's to do with the fact that hydrogen needs less air to react than natural gas. So when we operate with hydrogen, we're actually operating at leaner mixtures, which allows us to go to lower temperatures, which reduces the NOx. Okay. Furthermore, we find that when looking at kind of the totality of these devices, up to maybe 40 or 50% can be tolerated with conventional units, maybe even 70 to 80% for low NOx units. This is doing nothing to the device, right? If I was a combustion engineer and you said, hey, can you make something around 50% hydrogen? I said, absolutely I can, and I can optimize it to perform. These are all natural gas water heaters that are just being put with hydrogen now, right? They have no knowledge of what's going on, and yet the emissions performance is quite good, and they're fairly tolerant of hydrogen. When we get above 80%, things are a little bit different. But I would say that to the point made earlier, right, up to 30% hydrogen, we are good to go, right? What about cooking? Well, this is a very hot button topic right now, as many of you are aware. What about cooking? Well, let's just look at one result here. All right, so this is NOx emissions and carbon monoxide and unburned hydrocarbon, air pollutants, right? We don't want these in the emissions of the stove. If we look at the NOx behavior, right, we actually see that there's a steady decrease in NOx with higher amounts of hydrogen. Okay, and stoves, ovens, these things can tolerate up to maybe 50% hydrogen. Again, you know, no, we're not changing anything on the device, just changing the fuel. And if you're really interested in this, we've got a big old report for the CEC that talks about the implications of adding hydrogen to natural gas on the performance of all these devices. And what you can kind of see here is some color coding. This is green, meaning better performance, right? So anything that's green means NOx was reduced or CO was reduced. Yes, some of the devices, there's an increase, right? And again, if we were to actually work on the design of these systems to specifically accommodate even more, right, these numbers could be reduced even further. Okay, so how do we put all this together in terms of air quality, for example? This is California's 2017 greenhouse gas emissions from all different sectors. The study that we looked at is only looking at this little piece of the pie here, right? Not a whole lot. And remember, within this pie, right, this is the mix, right? So about half of this greenhouse gas emission is coming from water heating. Another half maybe from space heating, right? We aren't commenting on any of these other devices at this point. So if we look at greenhouse gases, so CO2 reduction, right? Here's a table of you know, the implications for all of these devices if we put in, say, 20% hydrogen. What is the bottom line of this? Well, within California, if we were to have 20% hydrogen blended into natural gas, our existing appliances would have a carbon dioxide reduction equivalent to removing about 700,000 gasoline cars from the roads. Remember, user appliances are not that big of a bit of the entire greenhouse gas emission. What about air pollutants? Okay, well, this is where things get a little bit trickier because some of the devices we see a decrease in NOx. Other devices, there's a bit of an increase, right? But when you throw at this the gas utilization, right? Because remember, the water heating is the biggest use, right? So, you know, if you weight these by the amount of gas actually used, what you see is that for 80% of that natural gas that's used, the NOx actually decreases, okay? And again, this is just legacy devices. We haven't tried to make appliances that are designed to operate with good performance on high levels of hydrogen. We haven't done that yet. I'll talk about that in a minute. What happens to the air quality? Well, we can take all of these measured results and the trends in terms of the NOx emissions, and we can try to translate that into what happens in the state to the ozone levels. Right? And what we're looking at here are simulations of the air quality change when we put in 20% hydrogen into these appliances that are located everywhere throughout this state, according to, you know, ArcGIS and other kinds of data inputs. And what you can see, the blue, right, represents decreases in ozone. Over on the right, these are decreases in PM 2.5 with 20% hydrogen. Okay, so at least with the current mix, just changing the fuel out, it's kind of a benefit, right? We see a benefit. Now, what about beyond blending? Because the fact of the matter is 20% hydrogen by volume, even 30% hydrogen by volume, doesn't really decarbonize things very much. Right? This is only maybe 7% on a mass reduction, right? We really need to get to 80, 90, 100% in order to really decarbonize the fuel. So, can we develop a water heater that can run on 100% hydrogen? So, here's an example of a water heater. And we worked with the manufacturer to not just take it as it is, right, but let's actually make some changes to the device so it can operate on 100% hydrogen. And so we did that, and these are some images of what the water heater burner looks like. But what happens with the emissions? Well, here's the emission levels that we got for this 100% hydrogen water heater. There's different firing rates, 50,000 BTUs per hour, for example, or the yellow is sort of the target, 100,000 BTUs per hour. These are the regulations for NOx for water heaters, notably in South Coast Air Quality Management District, as well as in Utah, where we both have challenges relative to air quality. The limit is 10 nanograms per joule, right? 10. And these levels are, below 2 down to maybe 1, right? So the NOx from this 100% hydrogen water heater is 90% below the regulatory limit. According to our friends at the South Coast Air Quality Management District, our air district needs to reduce NOx emissions by 68% in order to become in attainment. So at least for the water heater, right, here we're more than helping out this reduction. What about performance of the water heater? Well, here's an example of water temperature versus time for hydrogen and natural gas. And if we look at things like this heating rate, the basic message from this is that both of these fuels have pretty much the same heating performance. In both cases, 100 kilobTUs per hour is being put in. That's what ends up heating the water, is this heat input. Okay, so if we go back to the question, right, what happens when we use low carbon fuels? Well, we see that for the most part, NOx actually decreases for legacy devices, right? And again, if we know that we're going to be blending hydrogen or that we're going to have 100% hydrogen, we know what to do to design these devices to achieve even lower NOx emissions. And this translates into an air quality improvement and the ability to significantly decarbonize buildings. What's next? Well, I don't know, right? We can all talk about it. This is a very hot button thing, right? Are we going to just electrify all this stuff? I think in some cases it makes sense. Is hydrogen going to be at play? You look at battery cars, you look at fuel cell vehicles. I don't know, who's winning? But if hydrogen is a valid vector for decarbonizing, right, we'll have to see. These are just, recent headlines, right? EU, 100% renewable hydrogen, hydrogen pipeline network. Biden-Harris, we're going to, put billions of dollars into hydrogen hubs. Julia Child being forced to cook on an electric stove because the sponsor of her program made electric stoves, right? But she hated electric stoves. Angeles Link, LADWP, SoCal Gas, right? We're going to have 100% hydrogen coming into the LA region. A lot of it's to decarbonize ports, right? But there's going to be hydrogen infrastructure in place. On the other hand, you have the Bay Area, for example, along with others, right? Climate history, and Therese can comment on it, right? okay, we're banning gas water heaters by 2027. You won't be able to buy one and install it. City of Irvine, 2 weeks ago, they just passed an ordinance. No more gas appliances in commercial buildings. Right? But, you know. Shouldn't our portfolio be diverse? Isn't that a rule? Anyway, this will be very interesting to watch how this all plays out. Demonstrations, right? Okay, so here's one. Hydrogen microgrid, SoCal gas. Okay, it feels a little, you know, this is in their best interest, so it's kind of not great. But the idea is that they have a hydrogen microgrid, right? They have a home, they have solar panels, they have electrolyzers that make hydrogen. This hydrogen could be used to fuel a fuel cell car, could be stored, just like electricity in a battery, and then used when you need it, right? I mean, hydrogen as a storage medium. Here's another example. This is in the Netherlands. In a couple months, they're going to have this up and running. It's a hydrogen village. They're not calling it an eco block, but, but maybe they could. I don't know. But yeah, the idea is to displace all the natural gas here with hydrogen. And they're going to have, you know, hybrid heat pumps, water heaters, right? To the point about outreach, super important, right? They got 33 homes. People said, yes, we'll sign up for this. Let's see how it goes. But yeah, hydrogen production adjacent to the town, put it into the local gas grid. Here's one of the blocks. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. And there's other examples, right? Canada, they've got hydrogen villages. But for this talk, hopefully I've tried to answer this question for you in a couple of ways. So thank you.
For the presentation. 2 questions, if you don't mind. Is the infrastructure to produce this hydrogen anywhere close to those 5, 10, 20, 40% of natural gas that you were showing as possible and beneficial? And the second question is the process of making hydrogen the way we would do it given the current situation of technology? Does it have byproduct that are negative, or it's all good also? Thank you.
Yeah, no, these are on point questions. So the first question, no, we're nowhere close, right? At least to make it renewably. We use a lot of hydrogen to make gasoline right now, right? A lot. But it's all made from natural gas. So, right? So what we need to do is go back to Jules Verne, 1874, and split water into hydrogen with electrolyzers, right? So, but where are we going to power those electrolyzers? Well, as we continue to build out solar, wind, we're already paying other places to take the electricity because we have too much from the renewables, right? So we can use that to power an electrolyzer, store the energy in form of hydrogen. That could be the path, right? You could store it in a battery, but at some point, hydrogen is going to outplay batteries in terms of the ability to shift the energy seasonally. At least that's my thought. So. Yeah.
So this is really interesting, and I don't know that much about it, so I hope you'll bear with me on a pretty vague question. But I did spend most of my 20s in chemistry labs, and we treated compressed hydrogen cylinders at the time, probably still, I'm sure still, as an explosive hazard. And I guess my question is just if you can summarize in some way what pain points remain from a safety standpoint in this hydrogen economy, in this type of infrastructure, And if, maybe we've made a lot of progress in the last 10 years or so that is also worth highlighting.
Sure, yeah. And I don't know. Have you ever thrown a match into a cup of gasoline? That's pretty scary. Have you seen a lithium-ion battery catch fire? Point is, all these things have hazards. Yeah, hydrogen, it does have a very wide flammability range. So that's something that has to be accounted for. There's potential for leakage. That has to be dealt with. That's really a problem at higher pressures. So these questions have to be sorted out. Is it worse than, say, natural gas? Yeah, that has to all be looked at.
There's some talk in the technical circles about the value of purple hydrogen made from nuclear power. The thought process there, coming back to the pressurized hydrogen, is the thought process is to build electrolyzers that will produce hydrogen at very high pressure, and so that you can store that hydrogen and then blend it with other things. So, and this is thought to be a very, one value chain for decarbonization. Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I think it's about the storage. Are you specifically thinking about nuclear as a way to generate it? Right?
Yeah, use nuclear to generate, and it's easy to store because the hydrogen is produced at a high pressure, so it's fairly easy to store. That's really the storyline.
We could also use the excess solar power that we're already creating, right? The electrolyzer itself will produce very high pressure hydrogen, right? So if it needs to be further compressed or liquefied, then those are parasitic hits on it. But yeah, it's really hard to beat a liquid hydrocarbon fuel as a energy storage media. But hydrogen, I think it's got the ability to be carbon free and get close.
So it was very interesting how the different devices responded to the mixes. Is there anything you can comment about why gas fireplaces somehow they were almost off the chart different compared to the other devices? Is that just size of the flame, or it's a very naive question?
It's an astute point and good observation, and I hear this all the time, and because it's true, right? So for a given mixture of fuel and air, right? If they're mixed at their so-called stoichiometric amount, the temperature for a hydrogen air flame is higher than a natural gas air flame. And that higher temperature is going to create more NOx. Right? So like the gas fireplace, it's just a pipe with holes. Right? So when you put the gas in, it comes out and it burns at its hottest temperature. So that's why in that case, yeah. Whereas all the other devices, there's some pre-mixing. A little bit of air goes in with it, and again, since hydrogen needs less air to burn, that extra air acts like a diluent, drops the temperature down. There's some heat transfer things going on as well. But yeah, those devices where it went up tend to burn as just, a simple fuel jet. Less control, yeah. So, or cruder, right? Simpler, yeah.
Thanks for the insights on the technical implications of including hydrogen. A thought comes to mind is, what would be the cost implications? And just to make it simple from a consumer standpoint, when you consider all the other alternatives.
Yeah, this is the thing, right? DOE has their hydrogen shot. They want $1 a kilogram, right? Our projections suggest 2.5 might be viable, right? The cost of electricity is going to be coming down. Like, yeah, where is it going to like level out, right? If it's $1 a kilogram, it's much cheaper than natural gas today. And natural gas is very cheap today. So
Hi. So I run a hedge fund, and a company recently came into my office to invest in his hydrogen running plane, private jet manufacturer. I should have kicked him out of the office in 5 minutes, but I entertained him for an hour. Given that it's explosive and it's expensive to separate it from oxygen, water, whatever, would you ever fly a hydrogen run plane? His incentive to me was if I invest in his company, he would give me a free trip to Vegas. My life isn't worth that 1 hour trip.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the aviation side, things are a little bit different. But, NASA flew airplanes fueled by hydrogen in the 1960s, and it was fine, right? Jet fuel is just like gasoline, right? I mean, they're both flammable. You could argue that they're dangerous, right? But the safety of everything is accounted for with the regulations, codes and standards, right? So all that has to evolve in parallel for it to be safe. So I think there's serious economic limitations for the aircraft application, just because, again, right, a drop of jet fuel has so much more energy and power content than hydrogen, right? It's just, so to make it pan out from a efficiency viewpoint or whatever, it's a real challenge.
Thank you.
Hey.
Are you PowerPoint?
Let's see. They come up here. It's Project Aurora. Sure. There we go. That's it. All right. So just moving the slides to hit that one. Huh? That's okay. Let's see if we get it up there on the screen. There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor Lee, for inviting me to speak. I think the last time we met was at the actual launch of Project Aurora at the La Crosse Innovation Campus, Lacey. Not sure if you're familiar with that facility, but it is a showcase facility for advanced clean tech companies, and I was one of those companies over the years. Cal Battery was the name of the company. That was acquired by Dow DuPont a few years ago, an advanced battery technology company, Material. And now I'm presenting something that's actually quite different to all the other talks today. Effectively, we've been working with the LADWP team at the La Crosse campus over the last 5 years to showcase what we would call best-in-class battery energy storage, solar, EV charging systems, attempting to put it all into one system and have it at this facility so people coming by can actually see those technologies. So we partnered up with some major companies, Schneider Electric, Ameresco, the largest independent renewables company in the US. So about 3 years ago, we were about ready to launch this project, and something happened here, pandemic, so it slowed down that project. And about a month ago, after a lot of work and going back in with the DBS and getting permits, we actually launched our operation there at the La Crosse campus. And I'd like to welcome anybody here to come and visit us. We are giving tours. We gave tours that particular day. And this particular project has evolved quite a bit. And what was to be a system where we were powering what the DWP had built in their facility called a case study home, or their smart home of the future, where we were going to power that and automate that home in there. We decided, with the help of our partners, to focus on something maybe a little more critical. And that was powering these particular units for the unhoused. Where this system now that you'll be able to see at the Lacrette's campus is actually an off-grid islanded system with solar canopy, battery energy storage system, and we are powering this particular unit there that's being really, it looks more like a container, but we'll show you a little more of how that is going to work out there. But the big vision really is for us to work with the City of LA and LADWP to implement these into villages. So we're looking to do 10 villages of 100 homes each. Now, these are relatively small homes. And the advantage to this is that we can power these up with our own system. So in relative terms, we can have a village built in a matter of months rather than years. And that's a pretty big deal. People quite aware of the challenge that we all face. And our 3 blocks away from move this forward and come down, for instance, is we have a and that the whole Project Aurora started and evolved, actually, even since Dr. Other technology in the Los Angeles, it's called Foldum, Advanced Building System. It's actually for of entrepreneurs like a vision to start out with. Evolve to these in mass quantity. Effective way. See up here on the screen, actually that is by what we call W Pro. From a company called Discover, working with another company. Still partner the